Okay, so welcome everyone to the latest edition of Unbreakable Strength Stories. So we've got a few opportunities to kind of talk with myself and Rob today, and obviously we've got Aaron Casey joining us as well, aka MOFO. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add people in to the conversation. Okay, so hopefully these invites have gone out. Hey, there he is.
Evening, sir.
Hey,
How are you?
it's a beard off today. It's a beard off. We've got the beards on show.
I've just had mine trimmed, so yours is. I've taken probably 50% of my strength off with the amount of beard taken off. Like Samson's hair.
Yeah, you know it is. Okay, so just quick introductions. Obviously, my name's Eddie Monks. I'm from Unbreakable Promotions. Kind of here with Rob Stiff again, my partner in crime, to speak
Hello.
on
Hello, Rob. We've not met before, have we?
the events.
How you doing? Nice to meet
Good,
you.
thank you, man. Very good indeed. Good.
Obviously, the main man for the conversation today, Aaron Casey, aka MOFO. I'll call you MOFO from this point forward, if it's all right with you, mate. So just kind of a bit of context, really. How you and I know each other really is, for some of you will know, I sort of competed in strongman for a while now. Gone through that usual cycle of injury, poor rehab, not really kind of getting the problem solved. And was referred to MOFO a few years back now, actually, sort of thing. And, we kind of went through the process of what we're going to talk about today and a few things. So I guess what I'm saying is I have some personal experience of what, what you do, the benefits that it can bring from that sort of thing. So, and I know that it's a massive subject that, a lot of people struggle with. And I think it's, an opportunity for hopefully for some people to get a little bit of information, a little bit of advice, to dispel a few myths, and sort of generally kind of, have a conversation around, rehabilitation, do's and don'ts, what works, what doesn't work, what's utter rubbish and should be stopped, and so I want it to kind of be as informative as we can.
Yeah, 100%. I think I think we've probably known each other. Is it getting on for about 4 years now?
Yeah, it's got to be something like that.
Yeah. So back then I was doing hands-on treatment as well as rehab stuff. I've got to the point now where I'm sold on the fact that hands-on doesn't fix injuries, that we've gone completely away from hands-on treatment and we're just doing injury rehabilitation now. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be discussed, a lot of myths we can dispel and things we can discuss.
So I think maybe a good place to start is to, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that will be watching this that will, have either worked with you or taken advice from you or heard of you, but I think maybe for some people that possibly might not have done, is it worth kind of doing a little bit of a history, where you started, how you kind of built to where you are, the steps that you've gone through, sort of thing?
So I've always been, I suppose, obsessed with training. That's always been my passion. So when I was about 10, I started swimming for the county, and even as a 10-year-old I was reading Peak Performance Journal and buying couscous from Holland and Barrett because I didn't sell it in the supermarkets back in those days. This was like the early 80s, I think this would have been. I then started cycling, so I had quite a few years as a competitive cyclist, and again, even as a 16-year-old, I was questioning my coach's theories and philosophies as far as training is concerned. And then I had a bad crash. I lost my passion for cycling during the forces. So I spent 6 years, and that's obviously where we've got a connection there, Adi, with your background. So I was in the Air Force, unfortunately. I know that's not really considered to be a proper force by most of the other forces.
You said it, not me.
I know. Well, I said it before you did.
I've got to be careful. I'm in my in-laws' house, and my father-in-law was 35 years in the Air Force. So
okay, good man. He's a good man. So I spent 5 years breaking people as a physical training instructor. I was posted to Headley Court, which was back then.
I've been there.
You've been there. Yeah.
I
So
broke my tib and my fib in my left leg.
Yeah.
Quite badly, so I was there for
So
a while. Yeah.
back then, it was a tri-service rehabilitation centre, so we were working across all forces. And this wasn't just combat injuries; these road traffic accidents, things. It was just service personnel. I think it was there that I started to I gained a love of or an interest in dealing with injuries, but I think it was there that I also started to question the merits of traditional approaches as far as rehab's concerned. So there was it was a place where a lot of physio students would go to do placements every quarter. What the physio students used to run the morning sessions, if you remember those morning PT sessions.
Yeah, painfully.
Painfully, yeah, absolutely. And I started to question, I suppose, the merits of, resistance bands and the traditional approaches, the things that people are probably used to having given from the physio, particularly when it comes to strength sports, because 9 times out of 10, if you were post-surgery, a resistance band is probably an optimal level of load to start the reloading process off. But if you're not a surgical case and you've had something grumbling around for a few months and you're still training, you might be having to train around the injury. A resistance band or some kind of body weight exercise probably isn't putting enough load through those tissues to rehab that injury. And fundamentally, what I realised in my last year in the forces was the same principles I'd used to build muscle and get people ready to go out on operations or break people, as it was in basic training, I was using to rebuild people. So I left the forces in '96. I went to uni, moved to London, went to uni, did my undergraduate degree, spent some time working in pro cycling. So I was in Europe for about 5 years working with a pro cycling team. Got a job at the 24 Le Mans. Went to work for a motor racing team for about a year in America.
Oh wow!
Came back to the UK, had some children. Took a job up as a lecturer, as a senior lecturer. So lectured in physiotherapy, sports and exercise therapy, sports science, those kind of sort of subject areas. And then I would say probably 10 years ago, started back up more in terms of the hands-on and the kind of clinical practice. As my kids got a little bit older. And MOFO came around about 10 years ago. And since then, we started specialising in, I suppose it started off as strength sports. So I started working with a lot of bodybuilders, powerlifters, strongmen. Strongmen wasn't as big back then when I first started it as it is now. And over the years, I've seen most of the big boys and girls on the strongman stage, in the strongman arenas. Most of the IFBB pro bodybuilders, and all sorts of other people to boot. I don't just work with elite athletes. I work with a whole variety of different people. Obviously, our paths crossed when you had your shoulder injury, which you picked up playing rugby. I think again in the forces.
Many years ago, yeah. Back when I was 18 and thought I was indestructible. And,
well, you probably were at 18. I think we all think we're indestructible at 18, isn't it? So when you get to like 45, 50, you think, okay, that was probably a stupid thing to do when I was in my 20s because I'm paying the price for it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you kind of listening to you kind of talk, you can hear the, the trajectory of how you've kind of gone through a variety of, sports and different kind of environments. And I know, as you kind of mentioned there, you spend a lot of time lecturing and stuff like that. And, you kind of touched on a little bit about wanting to get more kind of hands-on, and actually kind of get involved. And as you say, that's kind of where we met, sort of thing. But I mean, I guess I'm kind of thinking, there'll be some people that, as I say, that may have already have seen you, sort of thing, but there'll be other people that maybe have got an injury or they're struggling with something and not really sure how to get into that process. So, I mean, it might be useful if you could just kind of talk through, how people engage with you, how does the process go?
So I generally work online now. So people book an online consultation. And yes, you can diagnose injuries online. So whereas normally a traditional physio appointment would be 45 minutes, which might be 10 or 15 minutes of you telling the person about your injury, and then 30 minutes or so of treatment, I spend 45 minutes, pretty much talking at people, as I have a tendency to do. But in that 45 minutes, we dig deep into their injury, we dig deep into their training. So I get a really good understanding of, you know, the what caused the injury and what's maintaining the injury. And there's two ways to diagnose an injury. So when you see somebody from a hands-on perspective, they use a clinical reasoning model called hypothetico-deductive clinical reasoning. So you tell them what your injury, you know, I've got some pain here. They come up with a hypothesis and they test that hypothesis using orthopedic special tests. Now, the reliability and sensitivity of those tests is questionable, and that's been well researched. When you get more experienced, so I've been doing this now 30 years nearly, you get to the point where all injuries have patterns, and what I start to recognise when I'm talking to people is those patterns of injury, which then lead me to my diagnosis. So the online consultation is a diagnostic process. And then essentially, if people decide to work with me, I tend to work with them for 12 weeks, where I either take over all of the training or part of their training, and essentially I use their training to rehab their injury. And it's a process of managing load, managing, I suppose, progressions and regressions of exercises. Yes, there's some banded work that we introduce maybe to work specific parts of a muscle if they've damaged if they've got a shoulder problem, but they've also got some weakness in the scapular muscles. And it's a process. It's like being coached. You know, I think if you've worked with a coach, we have check-ins just the same as you would do with your coach. We have Zoom consultations, week 1, week 6 and week 12. We have a 30-minute Zoom consultation where we spend some time talking about how you've got on with your program for the first week. Week 6, it's updating the program and changing things and adding some volume in and some intensity in. And then at week 12, it's usually that's the point of discharge, but it's becoming increasingly, I suppose, evident now that once people have been through a rehab process and learned a different way to train, I'm getting increasing numbers of people wanting to then jump onto me as a coach. And my background is originally in strength and conditioning, you know, so I suppose I've been strength and conditioning as long as I've been doing coaching. So it's like rehab from the comfort of your armchair.
Do you think that those two things kind of go? Is that like the kind of the perfect fit? Yeah. The two things in tandem.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know that when you and I sort of worked together, obviously I had a coach.
You worked from Eurus, weren't you?
Yeah, sort of thing. And you know, and we were, you know, you and I were kind of talking about things to do. And I know that you and Eurus kind of spoke to each other, and you know, but I mean, I guess I can see the benefit of having it all in house.
Yeah.
You know, because everything that I guess you're asking, I mean, I use myself as an example. Everything you're asking me to do in those sessions is geared around supporting the rehab work. You know, so
it's supporting the rehab work. I think there's a lot of I think the problem with strength sport, and this is probably more prevalent in the bodybuilding world than it is so much in the strongman and the powerlifting world, where they tend to periodize their years. But certainly in the world of bodybuilding, you know, the only thing that changes from prep to their sort of their off season is the amount of food they're eating, the amount of drugs that they're taking or not taking. Strongman, strongwoman, powerlifting, you know, there tend to be blocks of training where you're working on specific things. And I think as a result, I think that reduces the number of injuries. And if I had to sort of say out of the three types of strength sport, who commonly is more injured, it tends to be the bodybuilders because of the way that they progressively overload and everything's taken to failure. And you'll know from your time with Eurus, you know, Eurus is an S&C coach, and there's periods of time where you're not really even lifting anything. You're doing things like box jumps and sled push and pulls, and you're doing GPP, you're doing physical conditioning. So rehab with me looks like a strength and conditioning session. And I do work with bodybuilders, and I do create programs specifically for muscle hypertrophy. But if I'm working with a strong man or a strong woman, it looks like essentially something that you could run in your off season. And then when you get to 5-6 weeks away from the event, and the events are released by the organizer, you could then transition from your squat and your deadlift and your overhead press and your bench press into your log press, into your loaded carry, into whatever it was that. So you replace like with like.
I mean, I guess the obvious question that people might be kind of thinking, is that, do I need to have, kind of specific equipment? Do I need anything specialist? Is it just, I mean, obviously, I'm guessing that if people come and talk to you, they may be going to the gym, might be engaged in some sort of sports, whether it be strongman, bodybuilding, whatever it might be, is that, I guess there might be people thinking, well, do I need anything in particular, like specialist equipment in any way?
No, I mean, I'm adept enough at programming to be able to work around most kind of limitations. I've been working with a couple of guys out in the Middle East at the moment, out on operations out there, and we've got very limited kit. So I work with what I've got. Essentially, with the use of bands and gravity, you can make body weight hard enough to start to see progression.
Well, I mean, I know that I've seen you say it, and as have other people, that I mean, your first kind of point of call should be able to actually do things with your own body weights.
Yeah.
Before you sort of pick anything up or lift anything, is that your pull-ups, your push-ups, or whatever, those kind of exercises are important.
Yeah, I think a foundational strength. I think if you were starting off, having never trained before, I think a period of anatomical adaptation, where you're doing body weight type movements, it should be a prerequisite. So if you've had a period of time, you've finished a competitive period, you've had a few weeks off, before you start going back into the gym lifting weights, that period of anatomical adaptation is what does the conditioning work, so that when you transition back into your weight sessions, you've developed a little bit of tissue tolerance in the muscles and tendons and all the connective tissues that you're going to start loading more heavily when you move back into your compound movements. So yeah, I think it really varies. I've got people who've got home gyms that I'm working with, so there's obviously more limitations there. There's people who train out of the Mecca, so we've got there's no limitations in terms of the equipment they've got there. Interestingly, I rehabbed a guy in Mongolia, a bodybuilder in Mongolia. And that was, it was interesting. The interesting thing was the Zoom call I had with him, or the Zoom calls I had with him, the reception was better than when I was speaking to somebody in Bradford, which is about 10 minutes down the road. He was 6,000 foot down this mine, and the reception was incredible. I was like I don't have that reception when I'm talking to someone in Bradford, which is like 5 minutes away.
You need that Mongolian Wi-Fi in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So whatever they're using over there, it's much better than it is over here.
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing these sorts of things as well. Do you know what I mean? If you get dodgy Wi-Fi, it's
oh god, yeah.
I mean,
we live up on top of the moors, so our internet connection is dubious at best. So yes, it can make for challenging Zoom calls when the internet decides to go down for whatever reason.
So you're not doing any hands-on treatment at all anymore?
So HQ, so we used to have a clinic in Batley, which is where I saw you. Our lease ends at the end of April, so our lease ends the end of April. And it's got to the point where it almost felt disingenuous because people would come and see me from a hands-on perspective, and I'd say to them, you realise this isn't going to fix your injury. That's like my first sort of opening statement. And as I'm saying it, I'm questioning myself, well, why am I doing this then? Well, if that's what I truly believe, then why am I taking people's money and wasting their time doing things that I know aren't going to fix them? Yeah, there's some benefits to hands-on. It gives you some symptomatic relief. So if you're in pain, you can get people out of pain for a short period of time afterwards. But it's not reloading those tissues. It's not doing the things that strength and conditioning that you train in the gym needs to do and is able to do. And so it got to the point where, as I say, my guilt over taking people's money for doing hands-on work got the better of me. We're closing the Batley clinic down at the end of April, and the plan is for me to basically run online continuously. There will be some options. I've got some options at the moment. I'm talking to a few people about doing some now and again some hands-on stuff for kind of therapeutic purposes as opposed for injury rehab performance perspectives. I'll still be doing obviously the stuff with you guys down at SCL and various other events, but again, things like, you know, the strongman events that I did like with you last year, you're just patching the guys up so they can go back out into the next event. You know, you're not fixing the injuries in those situations.
I mean, I guess it's you're treating a symptom, not the root cause.
Yeah, absolutely. You're alleviating a symptom. Yeah, 100%. You know, somebody comes in after the deadlift ladder that he ran last year, that 380 kilo deadlift, the last one. You know, and their backs were absolutely pumped, so they were then struggling to get into positions to then lift the stones. So I was there to loosen off the erectors and loosen off the hips, so they could essentially hit positions to be able to pick up the stones, which I think was the event after the deadlift ladder, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
yeah.
It was the last event.
Yeah. I mean, that was, you know, it was. I took my kids down there for the first time, so my kids have never been to a strongman event, and I've done, obviously supported several. And my 11-year-old was absolutely gobsmacked by the size of the guys and girls that were down there. You know, they are absolute mutants. You know, you've got people like Gav Bilton and Andy Smith. You know, it's just like, oh my God, these are human beings. These are really big fucking human beings.
There's the very funny photo, and Rob will know the one I'm talking about, of Sean Hagan. He's 9 on 7 foot.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm sort of 6 foot and whatever sort of.
Yeah.
You know, I look like his little brother. Do you know what I mean?
I'll post it on my Instagram later. I took it in Romania, and Adi, like, I won't use the term that Adi was referred to once when we were playing rugby together on the pitch, but it was a horrible, big, rude word, rudest words you can say. And that's, if somebody said to me to describe Adi, that's the word I would invariably use in polite company. But he just looks like an absolute midget next to Sean, because Sean's just.
And I think that's, you know, I think the problem we've got when, like, people are looking at training programs. I mean, one of the things I see a lot of people do is they'll look at the leaders in that field. They'll look to the top level, and they'll try and emulate what those guys and girls are doing. And invariably, you're trying to copy somebody that is genetically different from you and I. You know, that might be just in their sheer size, or it might be in terms of their strength and their ability to be able to recuperate. And I think when I see people, you know, whose training program's been, you know, adapted from something that Eddie Hall was doing or something, you know, you kind of think, well, yeah, Eddie was, again, he was a mutant. He was a guy that on static lifts was just ridiculously strong.
And the thing,
you know?
the thing that you got to remember as well, and this is something that I is a pet interest of mine, I guess, in a way, is that excuse me, is that a lot of the guys that kind of go into this elite, certainly within strongman anyway, are people that have been really successful in other sports. Yeah, Ed Balls was a very, very high caliber swimmer, could have gone to the Olympics potentially, sort of thing, you know, and all those sorts of things. So, you know, I'm kind of talking about that, you know, that point around genetics, you know, that they're kind of gifted physically in lots of ways, and, you know, they might go, you know, you might go to one sport or the other. Yeah, you know, that's the thing, but it's, you know, they are kind of have the advantage, and a lot of these guys that you kind of see now, that, you know, they kind of appear on the TV screen or a show or something like that, and, you know, you see the end result. You don't see the literally years and years and almost decades of gradual progression, building that muscle tissue, the tendons, and all that sort of stuff to be able to lift the crazy weights that they do.
And I think
they haven't got there.
It's a really interesting point, because I think what social media does, and I think what a lot of I see on social media and on YouTube and those sort of places, it makes it look like you can do what they're doing in 8 to 12 weeks. Yeah. You know, and as you say, you know, the chances are they've been training for 10, 15, 20 years. Yes, it may not have necessarily been in the strongman arena, but they've been doing some physical conditioning, some strength and conditioning work for years and years and years prior to them then becoming a strongman or a power.
I mean, a really interesting, a good example of that anyway is Kane Francis, who's kind of, you know, exploded onto the scene, and everyone's like, oh, where's this guy come from? You know, but if you actually go back and look, you know, the guy was a top-notch kind of powerlifter before, you know, and he's transitioned in. But, you know, if you are just an out-and-out strongman fan, he's the guy that's just appeared. You know, 12 months later, I mean, he's just got his invite to World's Strongest Man as a reserve in his first year of strongman, which is mental.
The same as like Shane Flowers, Mitch Flowers. They've all come through, you know, elite level powerlifting or elite level sport in some description. I think, didn't Gav Bilton play rugby? Didn't Gav?
So
you know, you're trying to emulate people that are elite in every sense of the word. It's not just their strength; they've got mindset and the recovery ability and all those things that I think that population group tend to share.
And I think it's a really interesting point, because social media makes the sport more accessible. It encourages people into the sport, any strength sport, it does. But I think it also sets a false expectation, you know. And I think I've been guilty of falling into that trap of looking at someone lifting and going, oh, I'm relatively strong, I'll be able to do that. Wow, and I've had my arse handed to me. And it's taken me kind of, I think I've been back training properly for 3 years to get anywhere near decent numbers that would allow me to compete. And I think that's the biggest thing is time. You've got to be consistent, you've got to commit time to this and time to your rehab and all the other bits. And particularly, you know, the three of us on this call are in our
early
veteran. We would be in the veterans category or the masters category.
I'm an M3 powerlifter, so I'm 52 this year. So we're old boys.
I now refer to it as 30 with 20 years experience.
And I think that's a really good point, Rob, because I think you can build strength relatively quickly, but I think what people lack is tendon strength. The thing that takes the time to build the resilience and the ability to be able to handle that load are the tendons. You know, I'm working with a couple of people at the moment, relatively new to the strongman sport, and yes, they're strong, but they're injured all the time because their tendons haven't had the years and years and years of conditioning that they need in order to, I suppose, to be as strong as they need to handle the weights they're doing. It's like I did when Graham Hicks ruptured his bicep. I did Graham's bicep rehab. Now, if you went through the NHS, you know, at 3 weeks, you're told to not lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. Well, Graham being Graham, and he nicknamed me the Dream Crusher throughout the course of this this rehab, because he'd come to me saying, I'm going to do this week, and I'll go, no, you're not, Graham, you're going to do this. At 3 weeks, he was dead. He was hammer curling 20-kilo dumbbells. At 6 weeks, he was log pressing from pins a 70-kilo log. 12 weeks, I think he axle deadlifted 300 kilos. And that was the point where the NHS was saying, right, you're ready to go back to light duties. And that's what I mean. So Graham, again, come through the powerlifting world. You know, he's been an elite level athlete for a long period of time. And because he's of that background, the rehabilitation process was completely different to somebody that had just come into the sport and just got injured. You know, so, you know, I work with other people who've had bicep tendon ruptures, and it's a much slower process because they haven't got those years and years and years of conditioning that it takes to build that tendon strength. You know, if we measured a strong man's tendon, the cross-sectional area of the tendon will be bigger than that of a person that wasn't lifting weights and lifting the kind of loads that they're lifting. And with cross-sectional area comes strength. You know, that's where you develop that tensional strength that they've got.
I mean, you kind of summed it up really well, but it's, you know, it's that time and conditioning, and you know, and you got to bear in mind as well is that all these guys have, you know, I mean, strongman's come a really long way in the last 10 years, for example. You know, so a lot of the guys have got nutritionists, they've got a proper rehab program, you know, and all the bits around the edges are kind of built out, and, you know, with that natural genetic gift, I guess, that they have.
Yeah, they're becoming much more like athletes, aren't they? I think the way that the events are going, you know, it's becoming much more about being able to move mass over distance as opposed to the static events like it was when it first started.
And I think, you know, that's a really big thing. This is an interesting theme that's come up in every one of these we've done. Actually, if you look at the average the average body composition, sort of body weight of a strongman now is around about 130 to 150 kilograms. You know, it's gone away from the 220, 215, 220 kilo static monsters, because people, you know, if you're filling arenas, you don't want to see somebody from the back row looking at somebody do a squat. You know, you hardly see anything. Looking at somebody do static deadlift, you know, is not a spectacle. So the actual growth of the sport and the fact we're filling arenas is now driving the body shape almost of the athletes. They're becoming much more dynamic, moving, you know, athletes now.
And I think that's reflected, you know, that should be reflected in the training. You know, I think it was like I said, when it first started, it was mass moves mass, wasn't it, essentially? And I think what we're seeing now is mass that moves better, moves mass more efficiently. So, you know, they're becoming those people that have come from other sports, the athleticism they bring from those other sports enhances their ability to be able to be a competitive, you know, strong man, strong woman.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, Pavel Kordiakis, who's the guy that's won Europe's Strongest Man. You know, you look at his, you know, he's 6'5", he's a big guy. Do you know what I mean? I'm not suggesting that he's not, but you know, his body shape is very different.
Yeah,
you know, he's a, you know, kind of it's almost like the other end of the spectrum of what the guy's obviously clearly very, very strong and very, very good at what he does, sort of thing. But you know, I mean, kind of going back to the point we were making earlier on about the genetics and all that, is that the bit that we didn't talk about is the commitment, the dedication, and effort.
Yeah.
You know, you can be as genetically gifted as you could be the most genetically gifted person in the world. If you don't put the time in and don't put the graft in and the commitment, you know, and anyone that's done any kind of sport at an elite level, no matter what it is, will understand the amount of how it almost overtakes your life.
Yeah.
You know,
you have to be obsessional, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, I think to be an elite in any sport, you have to have a little bit of a obsessional personality.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like Conor McGregor says, "I am not gifted, I am obsessed." You know, it's that's the life of a professional athlete. You know, it consumes all of your waking moments and probably all of your sleeping moments as well when you're trying to recover.
Well, I think a really good example of that is Johnny Wilkinson. To back to a rugby analogy, you know, he would put in 2 hours of extras kicking off each leg after each rugby session. So not only could he tackle, could he carry and everything, he was putting in those hours, and that's why his body broke down. And ultimately, I think that's why he had his sort of almost his mental breakdown as well, because he put himself under so much pressure with that obsessive nature that actually for him it became quite a negative connotation.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that happens a lot. I think that one of the things that I think we underestimate with injuries is that impact in terms of the psychological impact it has on people. You know, I think a lot of people use training as a way of, I suppose, modulating their mood.
Absolutely.
Whether that's bringing their mood up because they're feeling down, or whether it's bringing their mood down because they're too hyper. And I think when you take that away from somebody because they're injured, nobody talks about, you know, the psychological rehabilitation. Or if you had a bad injury, you know, I worked with Ryan Crowley, who tore his pec with Larry Wheels. Do you remember that video that went viral? So I'm sure Ryan won't mind me saying this, but Ryan it was almost like PTSD. It was such a bad tear. Every time we took his arm out into a position where, like, he'd be pressing, he came out in a bit of sweat. He went pale. Like, his vision started going funny. His vision, like, everything started shutting down. And I think when we talk about rehab, you know, there's the physiological rehab. There's the you know, really rebuilding the tissue strength and the connective tissues. There's psychological rehabilitation. That's rebuilding the confidence in your body. And I think there's also a neurological component to it. You know, I think when you've had pain for a long time, it changes your brain. We know that it changes the brain because things like the amygdala, your threat detection system, becomes more hypervigilant. So you start to do, you know, I've got people that can squat, but they can't deadlift because their squat movement pattern has become sensitized. It's become sensitized because they've trained through pain. And that's reinforced the belief in the brain, well, every time I do this movement, it causes pain. And then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I mean, I guess a personal example is, I know when I came to see you, like, I had a problem with my shoulder, and I had it for a long time, and I had a genuine injury, but it was in my head as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I still remember, kind of being led there, and you're kind of like cranking my shoulder back, and I'm like absolutely crapping myself, waiting for my shoulder to break off of my body. Yeah. And you're like, no, it's fine. It's good. It can go more. It can go more, sort of thing, But I'm like in my head thinking, no, it can't. No, it can't. And of course, and I've, since we kind of worked together and that, I've managed to get to a point where it sounds really stupid. If I distract my brain while I'm doing overhead stuff, my mobility improves instantly. It's still not fantastic, but I lose the tension in there, and almost like that, what you were just talking about, that kind of part of your brain that, that you're expecting pain, I distract it with something else. And it could be something stupid like counting something on the wall or whatever. Yeah. I'm not thinking about it. So I totally understand what you're saying.
I think I'm working with a guy at the moment who's got it's discogenic back pain. So he's got some issues with the discs in his back. And we're coming towards the end of that rehab process. Now, we haven't missed a beat training. Yes, we've had to modify things and we've had to bring things back. But we're at the point now where his back has healed, the disc has healed. And when he has an episode of back pain, he tells it to fuck off. He's like, just fuck off. I haven't got time for this right now. I'm busy. And 9 times out of 10 in those end stages of injury, distracting yourself, because I think a lot of the remnants of pain that you get in those latter stages of the rehab process, it's almost like it's a bad habit. And if you can distract yourself from that bad habit, you distract yourself from the pain. So it's not as crazy as you think. I think when we talk about neurological changes in the brain, these have been well documented. There's people like Lorimer Moseley and David Butler who've done lots of fMRI scans on people's brains and shown that when you've had an injury for a long period of time, it does change the kind of pain sensors of the brain. And it's also interestingly closely linked to things like stress. So when if you're one of those people that kind of, uses training to manage your stress levels, and you can't train because you're injured, well, when you're more stressed, because the part of your brain that processes pain is the same part of your brain that processes stress, the brain perceives the increase in stress as an increase in pain. So all of a sudden, you're having a shit day at work, and to top it all off, my shoulder's fucking killing me at the same time. And it's no coincidence. That is linked because it's the same part of the brain that's processing that information.
Yeah, I mean, on a base level, I know that I've had a few injuries over the years. We sort of work with them, but I find it massively stressful personally. Not because it's an outlet for me. It's it kind of helps. Obviously, you get kind of the old dopamine kind of thing when you exercise and all that sort of stuff, but. It's the way that you talk about having a stressful day. It's the way that I get rid of that. I kind of put it away. I burn the energy that I would worry about something with. So it means that I can kind of, I can sleep and rest and all that sort of stuff. So, and when you then take that away, that has that mental aspect where it kind of starts to really kind of hit you. And I guess that's the point where people start to go back to training.
And I think the problem is, I think a lot of people's experience of physio is the physio's telling them to rest.
Yeah.
The usual course of action when people come to see me is I've been told to rest 6 to 8 weeks. And it's like, why? Why are you resting something that needs to be rebuilt? So I think the starting point for a lot of people, the reason they don't go and see people in the first instance is because the usual advice is, rest it. And, I can tell you I would say the most common injury in strength sports are to tendons. And from a tendon perspective, the worst thing you can do for a tendon is rest it. Because when it's not loaded, instead of those collagen fibers being orientated to those nice parallel bundles, they become this mishmash of collagen. So when you do start to load it, some of those collagen fibers tear and some of those collagen fibers slide like they should do. So you end up in a worse place after 6 weeks of rest, or the tendon ends up in a worse place after 6 weeks of rest than it does if you carried on training but modified the training that you were doing. All rest does is reduces irritation or inflammation. So people think, I've had 6 weeks rest, my shoulder feels better now because you've reduced the thing that was causing the pain. And I think when they go back to training, they realise actually it's no better than it was 6 weeks ago. In fact, it's worse, because I used to be able to dumbbell chest press 40 kilos, and now 25 kilos is really hurting my shoulder because you're exceeding the load tolerance of the tendon.
All the science is fascinating.
Yeah, and this is why after 30 years I still love what I do. You know, I think it's morphed. You know, I think when I first started, I would be reading a lot about injuries. I think I keep up to date with injury rehab, but things don't change that quickly as far as rehab's concerned now. So the things that I'm reading now, you know, I'm reading about neuroplasticity. So how do we change these aberrant movement, these things in our brains that keep us locked into pain? I'm reading shit tons of stuff about training, because what I want to be doing is I want to be giving people the best possible chance of rehabilitating, whilst at the same time increasing performance. And I think with some of the bodybuilders, particularly, as they've gone through the rehab process, I mean, there was a girl I spoke to the other day. She's gained 3.5 kilos in the 12 weeks that we've worked together, despite the fact that I've halved her training volume. And I think that's why she's gained 3.5 kilos, because she was training too much. She was accumulating too much fatigue. And as a result of accumulating too much fatigue, instead of that muscle protein synthesis, that increased muscle protein synthesis, that's the adaptive response to the stimulus of training, instead of that being used to build bigger muscles, it was just repairing tissue damage, because she'd just destroyed the tissues. And I think that's the, you know, it's that stops people from seeking help, because I think, you know, I am obsessed about what I do. You know, I live, breathe, eat, sleep, shit this stuff all day, every day. So I am a bit like an elite athlete from that perspective, because I think my mindset, having been an elite athlete, I approached my job the same as I did when I was a cyclist or whatever.
I think it's the personality type, though, isn't it? Is that, you know, if you're predisposed to be that kind of person, you know, whether it's an obsessional nature, whether you become obsessed or, you know, about any subject, you know what I mean? You have that part of your personality, and for some people it comes forward in sports, you know, but it could be anything else. Do you know what I mean? Any other kind of interest you might have. I mean, it's kind of an interesting kind of conversation. I mean, I guess so. I wanted to kind of move on to just some kind of general advice, I guess, around, you know, like the common mistakes that people make. You know, if the things that you continually say to people when you speak to them, you know, I mean, I don't know, like the top 5 or top 3 or whatever. You know, what do you see the most?
So I think tendon injuries, as I said, are the most common injury. So I think tendinopathies. So there's I suppose the first thing I think is understanding what a tendon problem is. So we used to call tendinopathies tendinitis. So 10 years ago, there was some research done by Jill Cook and Craig Purdom, and they came up with a new classification system for tendons. And they talked about, well, by the time the tendon becomes symptomatic, it's probably gone through the inflammatory stage. So it's not a tendinitis, therefore anti-inflammatory is nice and all those things don't work. It's more of a tendinosis, which is degeneration in the tendon. So tendinopathy is a term that describes something that's wrong with a tendon. It doesn't differentiate between inflammation or degeneration. It just says there's something wrong with the tendon. So number one, I think the first mistake people make is they rest it. So that's the biggest mistake people make, is they stop doing the things that I suppose was keeping the tendon pain and the tendon disruption under a degree of control. I think the next biggest mistake is people then decide, I can't lift the heavy weights I was lifting before. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to replace it with a load of volume. And volume is just as damaging to tendons as load is. You know, so we're talking about, you know, I had a guy who had a back problem. This wasn't a strongman or a powerlifter, I hasten to say. He was doing 25 reps on the leg press. The first week, I think it was 4 sets of 25 reps on the leg press. Week 2 was 5 sets of 25 reps. And by about week 6, he was doing 6 or 7 sets of 25 reps. And that was on one movement, and they had another 4 or 5 movements for his quads.
A lot of volume.
Yeah, 100%. tons of volume. And he came to me with a back problem. I said, well, I'm not surprised your back's fucked. I mean, that amount of volume and load, because every set was taken to failure. I said, yeah, you've just exceeded your tissue load tolerance. So swapping load swapping load for volume, and when the volume's too high, that's another big mistake that people make. I think relying on hands-on treatments to fix them. You know, I think unless Jesus is resurrected, it is Good Friday. So unless Jesus is resurrected, you know, recently, your therapist isn't able to heal with his hands. And a lot of the times, the things that people do as a therapist are actually counterproductive to rehabilitation, to recovery. I don't know whether you've seen some of these pictures that are posted on various pages of the tool-assisted massage.
I was going to ask you about this. It's just funny you mentioned that about like massage guns and stuff like that.
Yeah. So if you look, you know, if you type in tool-assisted massage, you'll see all these pictures where people look like they've got third-degree burns on their arms or the back or the shoulders or the neck or wherever it is. And what that type of treatment has done has actually caused more tissue damage. I saw a girl who was training for a powerlifting competition, and her coach had done some tool-assisted massage. And she said, is it normal not to be able to sleep on your back for 3 days after you've had tool-assisted massage? No. And I said, no, it's not normal. It's like that. So in every sense of the word, if you think, so it's disrupted her sleep. And if we take sleep is one of the most important tools for recovery, that's impacted the recovery from not just the treatment, but from her injury. He's caused tissue damage. So now she's not only dealing with the damage to her back, she's now dealing with the damage to the soft tissues. So it's, you know, that kind of brutal beat down that therapists give people, that isn't therapeutic treatment. That isn't useful. It might feel good at the time because you produce a shit ton of endorphins. Your body, you know, like when you're in pain, in the same way as when you're training, you produce opioids. So you leave the treatment session after you've had the shit kicked out of you, and you think, oh, I feel really good, you know. You wake up the next morning, you think, fucking hell, it feels like I've been run over by a 10-ton truck. And then you can't train for a few days because you're sore in places, and so that impacts your ability to be able to be consistent with your training. So, you know, I think there's a lot of wrongs with the way that manual therapy is used, if it is used at all. You know, I think, like I said, I've moved away from using that stuff because it just felt disingenuous. But for those people that access that stuff, I think you've got to think very carefully about what you're allowing your therapist to do to you, because in some cases, you know, it's tantamount to assault. You know, it's battery. Yeah. I've seen. Regularly get sent pictures from people. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? You know, they've had treatment and they send me a picture of the back or the shoulder. What do you think of this? Is this normal? And it's like, no, that is not normal. Like, you shouldn't be bruised after a soft tissue treatment session.
I think you touched on it there, but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the simplistic way I look at it is that your body has a limited amount of ability to fix itself. So if you've got, you know, if you've got like a sore shoulder, and then you do a load of other things that it needs to fix as well, then surely you're detracting away from your body's ability to fix itself. You know, there's a
really interesting expression. It's an osteopathic tenant. So the guy that founded osteopathy in the 1800s, before we knew about the immune system, says your body has its own medicine chest. Now we know that's the immune system now, and essentially the immune system is what heals injuries. So if the immune system is dealing with that shoulder problem, and you're providing all the building blocks the immune system needs to work efficiently, so your sleep's good, your diet's good, you're eating your macronutrients and your micronutrients, you're eating fruit and veg, your stress management's good, your hydration's good, you're providing all the tools, all the building blocks for the immune system to recover that injury. But then somebody comes along and gives you a beat down, and now your immune system's having to deal with that on top of the original injury. And, you know, there's a limit to the amount of medicine that the body has. And I think when you get to that stage, that's when you start, you know, getting problems. And I think the other thing that I see a lot of mistakes made is the use of things like peptides and things like DECA, putting DECA into it. So there's some healing peptides called BPC 157 and TB 500. And I must be asked this question daily: shall I put some BPC in it or some TB 500 into it? Now, BPC affects the inflammatory response, and TB has some effect in terms of tendons, but they're essentially research chemicals. You know, we don't know what the long-term effects are. TB 500, thymosin, has been shown to cause certain types of cancer in rats. Yes, it's at super physiological doses, but we don't really know about these things. So when people are looking, they're looking for shortcuts. They're looking for those, like we talked about with training, you know, rehab takes a certain amount of time. The reason I run my rehab programs for 12 weeks is because it takes about 12 weeks to reload a tendon back up to full strength. You can't shortcut the healing process. You can't speed up the healing process. You can support the healing process by making sure you've got all your basics in line. But what that tendon or that injury needs is progressive reloading. And I think that's where a lot of the mistakes that people make are driven, because they want that quick fix, they want that shortcut, because they want to get back into the gym and get back to training.
What's your view on like anti-inflammatories, like ibuprofen, those sort of...
I think in the acute stage of an injury, you know, like the first 2 or 3 days, I think it's a good way to manage pain. I think the problem is there's lots of evidence anti-inflammatories prolong the inflammatory phase. So it means that if you imagine there's 4 stages of healing. So inflammation is stage 1. You then move into something called proliferation, which is basically where the body starts to lay down new collagen fibers. And then you go through the 3rd stage, which is remodeling. So which is essentially where that collagen starts to increase its tensile strength. The 1st stage being bleeding, where the tissues bleed. Now, these stages overlap, but essentially we have to get to the end of the inflammation stage before the macrophages then produce the collagen, which then stimulate the next stage of healing. So if we're into...
When we talked about it, you were saying about like spider's web.
Yeah, so in the inflammatory phase, you produce something called fibrin. And that, if you imagine you've got two sides of a wound, you've torn a muscle, you've torn a tendon, that spider's web, that fibrin, starts to connect the 2 sides of the wound. Now, it has the tensile strength of a spider's web. So if your therapist then puts the beat down on you, all he's doing is tearing that fibrin meshwork, which is the early scaffolding for your healing to take place, and then you're back into the acute stage of the injury again. So you just end up going around in ever decreasing circles. It's like ice, you know. I think there's a time and a place for ice, and that's in the very, very acute stage of injury when you're trying to slow the bleeding process down, because we need the blood to clot in order for hemostasis to take place, which then leads into inflammation. But I think after that point, ice does exactly the opposite of what the body's trying to do inside itself. So if we look at the chemicals and what happens during inflammation, the body produces things like histamine and bradykinins. And histamine opens up your blood vessels and makes those blood vessels more porous, because it needs to get big white blood cells into the area to help with the healing process. It needs to get rid of all the waste products from the injury. Whereas if we put ice on something, or we take an anti-inflammatory which works on a different medium, ice causes vasoconstriction, so it makes the blood vessels smaller and less leaky. And it's almost like we think we know better than the human body. I mean, if we've been on the earth for a few million years like we're alleged to have been, I don't think the body makes mistakes at this point. I don't think inflammation is a mistake. I think it's a necessary part of the healing process. So yeah, use some anti-inflammatories in the early stages in the first 3 to 5 days. But then, you know, your body is producing enough opioids of its own to essentially control any amount of pain. And what the pain's doing is it's controlling the amount of load that you're putting through those tissues. So it's almost like a strain gauge.
It's like a warning system, isn't it?
Yeah,
I guess, in a way.
If your pain goes up to a point where it's like 9 out of 10, you know very soon you're going to start causing more tissue damage. And I think that's the danger with things like anti-inflammatory is nice and all those things, is it's just prolonging something which is a normal and necessary part of the healing process.
And what about I'm sort of delving into my own interest now, because you fired me up. I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left, but and what about for long-term chronic conditions such as osteoarthritis and stuff like that? Something that, I've got stage 4 osteoarthritis in my right knee, and pretty sure it's in my left knee as well. And I find one thing that helps a little bit to take the edge off when the pain is bad is CBD rub.
Yeah.
But I'm loath to take anything more than that. But what sort of, what are the steps that somebody with a chronic long-term condition can kind of take to keep, other than keep it strong, which is, I think, is a really good founding tenement?
Well, it's interesting because I think up until I stopped lecturing, so physiotherapy, we were still teaching students to offload osteoarthritic joints. So when you see your GP or a physio, if you've got stage 4 osteoarthritis, they'll tell you to do non-weight bearing activity. Take up swimming, take up yoga or those sort of things. If we look at the structure of articular cartilage, which forms on the ends of your bones, it's a bit like a sponge. So when we compress a joint, it squeezes synovial fluid out of the cartilage, which gets rid of all the waste products. When we decompress the joint, much like if you drop a dry sponge into a bucket of water, it sucks fluid back into itself. And with that fluid comes nutrition. And with that nutrition comes the ability for you to be able to not regenerate the cartilage, because once you've lost it, you've lost it, but at least maintain the health of what cartilage you've got left. I've got a lady at the moment, I don't work with many kind of older people, because most older people have stopped lifting weights by the time they get to their 70s. There are a few that I work with. There's a few powerlifters I work with who are in their sort of late 60s, early 70s. But this was the mother of I think it was a powerlifter. So she was 69 years of age, waiting for total hip replacement surgery, in a lot of pain from her hip. Got her in the gym. We got her, I think she weighed about 60 kilos. And over the course of a number of weeks, we got her back to the point where she was leg pressing, I think it was 120 kilos.
Wow.
And her hip pain dropped significantly, and her function improved significantly, to the point where she questioned the merits of having the total hip replacement. And all we're doing there, that isn't like, it's not magic. All we're doing is we're taking a tissue and we're applying a load to a tissue that is appropriate for I suppose the physiology of that tissue. If you think about people who get osteoarthritis, and think about what happens when they're told they get osteoarthritis, they stop moving. They stop doing all the things that probably kept the cartilage healthy in the first place. Physios are still taught to offload things, and I think that's the research now supports, strength training and loading cartilage as a way of keeping that cartilage, what you've got left, healthy. I think it's no wonder that, that people struggle so much in those situations, because they're doing almost the opposite of what they need to be doing. Like you say, keeping the muscle, it's not just about keeping the muscle strong, it's about keeping the cartilage loaded. So you're squeezing it and decompressing it and squeezing it and decompressing it, and gaining that nutrition that comes from that compression and distraction force.
Aidy, you'll remember 3 years ago I had a pronounced limp.
Yeah.
And since I started training properly, I don't limp at all. And I've lost some clay, I've lost 30 kilos, which has helped massively as well. But my knee functions, I don't know. I am not on the cusp of needing surgery, so I'm really. It's really because I've had a real success story just by moving more.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think
everything you've said.
Yeah, I think and what I've said is supported by the evidence. I think the problem is, in terms of education, the curriculum around like manual therapy is driven by the governing bodies, and unfortunately, the governing bodies are behind the times in terms of the research. And because it's a huge job to overhaul a curriculum. You imagine like completely overhauling the physiotherapy curriculum. So a lot of the stuff that we're teaching, it's being taught by people who aren't in clinical practice, who haven't treated anybody for 10 years because they've gone down the academic route as opposed to the clinical route. And it's stuff that's been superseded in terms of its effectiveness by more current research. And I think when you work in clinical practice, it's like an acid test. If you're not good at your job and you don't keep up to date with things, you have no business. You know, it's like, whereas an NHS physio, well, there's people coming in all the time because they're ferried in there through the GP. So I think keeping up to date with current evidence and in terms of cartilage, chronic injuries, going back to your original question, there's a lot of stuff that takes place in terms of the brain. So some of your pain will be because of the changes that me and Adi talked about earlier in the amygdala and the sensory cortex. There's an app called Curable, and I have no allegiance with Curable. I don't make any money from Curable. I just think it's a really good product. And it's almost like the app retrains your brain. So you watch videos, educational videos, it gets you to do some various tasks. And it's like you're using this app to reprogram those aberrant pain pathways. So you have your physiological rehabilitation in the gym where you're building your strength and your stability. You have your psychological rehabilitation where you're rebuilding your confidence in the knee. And you have your neurological rehabilitation because you access one of these pain apps. And as I say, Curable is one of the ones that I think is one of the best on the market at the moment. If Curable was watching, by the way, I'll accept that. All donations are gratefully accepted.
Yeah. So we're just on the hour mark there. So I mean, it's been really, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming on. I mean, hopefully everyone that's kind of has joined us during this session, and obviously the people that will watch it afterwards. I mean, also I'll post it up onto my socials and stuff like that. You know, there's a ton of information in there. You know, and I think it's been a really valuable session. You know, I've learned some stuff, and I'm sure that there's things that, but obviously anyone that, you know, is in a position, you know, I would suggest reaching out to MOFO, you know, and you can kind of have a very individual conversation about, you know, your own personal problems sort of thing. Like, but, you know, I just want to sort of say thanks to you.
No, you're welcome,
for coming on and all that sort of stuff.
This is like, this is like talking about something you love doing. You know, it's like, what better job than being able to talk about something that you've done for 30 years and you still have the same passion for that you did 30 years ago. You know,
you can really get that from hearing you talk. I think we could have gone long form on this and done like 4 hours and still come back and done another one.
I'll come back on if you want. If you fall for it.
I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll put out some questions and we can do like a kind of more of a Q&A kind of sort of thing, like for sort of specific things that you know, people might want to talk about. You know, not like I've got a sore neck, how do I fix it? Because that's, you know, you can do that, but you know, sort of subjects that people are interested in, want to go into a little bit more depth about. You know, we can kind of go down that road. But you know, thanks again. Obviously, we've got Claire Myler on with us on Thursday. Obviously, Claire's a, you know, elite level kind of strong woman. You know, won the over 50s title at OSG this year, came third in the under 40, over 40s, you know, massively big in the strong woman scene. So she's going to come on, talk a little bit about, you know, her past and how she kind of got to where she is, and kind of talk a little bit about, you know, strong woman. And obviously that's on the rise massively now. You know, Giants Live have just announced their first all-female Giants Live show, which is a huge step forward sort of thing. So I'm looking forward to kind of speaking to them. So speaking to her. So I'll just say thanks again to you guys. Thanks to everyone that's kind of joined us today. It's been really interesting, and we'll sign off there. So thanks so much.
See you soon.
Thank you,
guys. Cheers. Happy Easter. Bye.